Hi everyone, welcome to this presentation about pricing your work. To begin with, it's important to understand that we want to price our work based upon where we want to be in 5 years, where we want to be as a successful photographer, not based upon our position in the marketplace today. If you're just starting out, guess what? You're in the best position to charge what you need to charge because you aren't making your living from photography or digital media production yet, or whatever art form you're doing. You're not making a living from that, so you might as well set your prices where they have to be in order for you to achieve success. The reason I say that is because the reality is when you raise your prices later on, you lose all your existing customers and have to start over anyway. So you might as well start out where you need to be. I'm going to talk to you about 3 different pricing models. The first one is a creative fee plus expenses plus usage pricing model. This is the traditional model used in commercial advertising photography. It's also the pricing model most often used with digital media production, video projects, etc. With the difference being that with video projects, you typically don't get an additional usage fee for that because that's considered work for hire, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. This pricing model is based upon you factoring in all the time necessary for you to create the work, plus all the expenses associated with creating the work, whether it's hiring models, makeup artists, production assistants, all those factors that go into it. And you want to mark those expenses up at least 100% so that you have some room to be able to provide awesome customer service in case something goes wrong. And then finally, usage is the value of the work based upon how it's being used. Is it being used in a local advertisement, a regional advertisement, a national advertisement? Obviously, the larger the reach, the more value of that image. And then usage is also determined in part by the complexity of the image. Is it a high production value image that required lights, makeup, models, etc.? That's going to be worth more than a photojournalism candid type of photograph that required a lot less effort to produce in most cases. So usage is a difficult thing to wrap our heads around, and it's a very difficult thing, particularly in smaller markets like Spokane, where people are not accustomed to paying extensive usage fees. But again, we will talk more about usage fees when we get to our contracts and bidding and estimating and building sales proposals. So don't worry about it too much right now. When using this pricing model, the first thing we have to do is figure out our hourly rate. How much is our time really worth? And so that's what that financial model spreadsheet was for, and we'll look at that in just a moment. But here's an example I've put into the assignment for developing your pricing models. Is basically this. You would take all your fixed expenses, your studio overhead, any employee payroll, heat, your power bill, your cell phone, all your fixed expenses for an entire year, and on top of that add your target salary of what you'd like to make back from the business, and this becomes your overhead. Next, we determine our total number of hours that we're going to be able to bill our clients in a year for. The best piece of advice I've received was to not factor in for more than 16 hours a week of billable hours because you're spending the other hours of the week pursuing business, networking, being out in the community, etc. So in this scenario, we typically look at 16 hours a week, and then we multiply that by the number of weeks in a year we expect to work based upon our vacation schedule, and we come up with a total number of hours. Then we divide our fixed expenses plus our salary by the number of hours to come up with an hourly rate. The next step is to figure out the job parameters, the scope of work, and how much time you think it's going to take for you to create the imagery that the client's looking for. So here I'm going to give you a scenario that you've been asked to photograph a business with an overall objective of being able to have these images to use on their website. If it's a simple retail operation where you can just go in and do a quick photo story in a single day, that's one type of job. However, it's a manufacturing process that might be more complex, that you might have to schedule multiple days to go in at different times. For example, I know one photographer that works with a large corporation that he has to go in about 1 day a month for an entire year to complete one story. So you have to figure out what that scope of work is. For the assignment, I'm giving you a scenario that's a simple 1 day photo shoot. And so you would simply take the hourly rate times the number of hours in a day, and you'd come up with your creative fee. And in this case, we came up with a fee of $1,160. The next thing we'd want to do is we'd want to estimate our what I'd call our cost of goods sold expenses, which are the expenses we will incur because we're doing the work, not because it's our fixed overhead, but it's expenses only related to producing this work. So that might include data transfer and storage, retouching, final retouching, any packaging materials, as well as all the other expenses if I were to hire production assistants, etc. But here we're saying this is almost like a backpack journalist. I'm going to go in with a camera, shoot a photo story about the owners of a company and their customers interacting. Don't forget your model releases, by the way, and property releases, but we'll talk more about that when we get to that module. And just making sure that you understand that any basic expenses you want to mark up at least 100% so that you can provide excellent customer service and not lose any money. So here I've gone through a scenario of having an assistant that I'm paying $25 an hour, but I'm charging the client $50. A digital processing fee, basic color correction, the cost of hosting an online client gallery, and the time. That's really more the time it takes to create that gallery. And then final retouching based upon a set number of final images that the client and I have agreed upon for the photo story. For any new client, I might charge an annual fee for storing and archiving their work because I'm going to actually buy a separate hard drive to back their work up onto, as well as keep some cloud backup storage options as well. And of course, cloud storage isn't free, so I need to be able to recoup that expense as well. The big challenge we have in the digital era is that there were a lot of expenses associated with film production that were very easy to show the client. And in today's world, the hardest thing to charge for is your time. So when I was paying a lab to do color correction and processing of transparency film and printing of color prints and all those things, packaging, mounting, all that stuff, it was very easy to mark that up and the client could see the tangible product. In today's world where I'm delivering so much digitally, it's very hard to articulate the value of that extra time that goes into it. So you either front load it in your creative fee, or you end up making sure you charge appropriate digital service providing fees, DSPs, or digital processing service fees. Now we're not buying a lot of material costs, but we're actually spending a lot more time because we're responsible for all the color correction, all the retouching, etc. So the next step then is to calculate your usage, and this is where I'm going to recommend product as well. I would go to the ASMP Business Practices website and look for recommendations on how to quote usage. I would also encourage you to find out who are your local ASMP photographers in the area, and when you're first starting out, call them up because they would gladly help you with the usage. They're not going to be able to set your prices for you because that would be illegal. But I know many photographers who would rather have a conversation with you up front about what's the appropriate usage fee than to see you ruin the marketplace by undercutting and underbidding prices. So this is why I think it's very important to build a network of professional affiliations through trade associations and get to know photographers outside your local market as well, so that you can have these behind the scenes conversations as you're first getting started to know how much your work is really worth based upon how it's being used. So As I said before, one-of-a-kind images are worth more than candid shots, and images for a national brand are worth more than a small mom-and-pop local business. A friend of mine actually knows the photographer that received six-figure income from Microsoft because they used a stock photo of his of I believe it was a canola field. A lot of those high usage fees for stock photos have disappeared because the stock agencies have been bought out by companies like Microsoft, who I believe they own Getty Images now. And so the major stock photography agencies have become corporate owned, and those corporations are able to use those and sell those images for a lot cheaper than what us photographers used to be able to command, which is why microstocks become more important, and maybe why you might want to consider having your own stock business model for yourself to be able to sell your images individually. Anyway, getting back on track here, again, PhotoQuote by Craddock Software, and then I've got a good article for you to read about usage fees. I will tell you, in my experience, my limited experience, I spent 5 years doing primarily commercial photography work. I typically started out with a usage fee that was relative to usage, but obviously a lot of my clients were very small local industry people, so there wasn't much of a value beyond the local marketplace. So then what I ended up doing is adopting a fee that was an annual licensing fee that was equal to 10% of the original job. And that was just something I did for myself because that kind of got back to the idea in my financial model of I want my digital assets to produce at least a 10% return on an annual basis. And so managing that was a lot easier to sell to my clients. I just said, you know what, I'm just going to send you an invoice at the beginning of next year. If you're still using the image, please pay it. Once you determine your hourly rate, the scope of work, the creative fee, the expenses associated with the project, and then the usage fee, now you're ready to write a business proposal, a sales proposal, or an estimate. And we will go over that in another module, but that would be the next step, because actually the numbers by themselves are not going to get you a yes or an approval. It's going to be the words of how you package and describe the value of what you're providing. That's going to make the difference, but we will talk about writing sales proposals in a different module. So here's the final scenario that I've given you in the assignment. We developed a creative fee of $1,160. We had $1,600 of expenses. We charged a $300 usage based upon 6 images and a $50 per image usage for a total price to the client of $3,060. I think that's a pretty typical one-day photo shoot bid. I don't think you'll see that as being too high or necessarily too low. And here's the neat thing about pricing. If you have an accurate business financial plan spreadsheet, then you know how much you have to charge to achieve your goals, and you don't worry about what anybody else is charging in the marketplace. I don't worry about it. We'll talk in just a moment about what I do worry about, which is price points. I'm concerned with what the market expects to pay at certain price points, and then I will adjust my services up or down to those price points. But that's when we get to the third pricing model that we'll talk about in just a moment. As I said, I want to point out that video projects most of the time are considered works for hire, and the company that pays you ends up actually retaining the rights to that video project unless you write it specifically in your contract. And we'll talk about contracts a little bit later. Typically, video work, the client is deemed the producer, and with video projects they are generally a production team approach. And so you'll notice if you watch movies, you see Steven Spielberg listed as the executive producer on a lot of different projects. Even when he's not director, he's invested in a lot of different projects and he retains a lot of the ownership of those projects. I actually sat in a meeting of the Spokane Advertising Federation and watched as local commercial photographer and filmmaker Don Hamilton explained to a room full of his clients, these are the art directors from ad agencies, that yes, for still photography, he owns the entire copyright and he charges a usage fee. For video work, it's work for hire and he doesn't charge the usage fee. I don't particularly agree with that approach or attitude, but the reality is if you look at graphic design, they don't charge usage fee for their design work, even though it would seem to me that it would be copyrightable. So if you're in the commercial market, you're going to be working with graphic designers, art directors, marketing directors, and in that space of business, those folks are not used to charging usage fee for their services, so they're going to be very reluctant to pay it for video projects because they're not accustomed to it. Still photography, they will try to not pay it, but they are generally aware that there is a value to still photography, and that is one of the reasons I love still photography is we still have our copyright ownership and creative ownership of the final project. The second pricing model is a traditional retail pricing model, which simply means that we mark up all our expenses related to producing the product. Typically, we're marking up our lab expenses by a 5 or 6 times factor. If you're first starting out and you're really concerned about pricing, a minimum 4 times, but most of the time 5 to 6 times is the appropriate markup for that. And so in this pricing model, you're selling a finished retail product like a framed portrait or a matted print, and you're marking it up based upon what it costs you to produce that work. So this pricing model has traditionally been used by photo finishers and portrait photographers who are selling multiple prints to the client. So therefore, we're spending a lot less time working on the job in relation to the number of prints that we're selling. One image might sell 20 prints from that image, or at least 4 or 5 for a typical family portrait. So I'm reproducing the same image over and over, and I'm just marking up my cost. As a business consultant, I've worked with a lot of studios around the country. I can tell you that if your cost of goods sold gets over 25%, chances are you're going out of business. So the most successful businesses kept their cost of goods sold down to 15 to 20%. And here's the thing about markup on the retail end of things. Your markup is based upon the relative cost of materials, meaning that if it's a low cost material, then I have to mark it up a lot more than if it's a high cost item. So for example, if I'm selling a house that the average purchase price is over $250,000, the typical service fee for that, or the markup commission, is 6%. Whereas if I'm selling an 8x10 print that only costs me $3.50, I'm going to mark that up at least 5 times, maybe even 6, because it's such a low cost that I have to justify my overhead expense and make all my money off of that markup. You'll notice grocery stores have a markup of only 2 to 3%, as do credit card merchant services typically have a very small markup, but the volume of sales is so great that they're still making a huge profit. With photography, I always tried to explain to my customers, and particularly when I had a portrait studio that was directly across the street from a photo finishing lab, they would come in and ask, well, Ira, why is the 8x10 that I'm buying from you costing me $50 when I can buy it for $3 across the street? And I have to explain to them that it's the law of supply and demand. The photo finisher is collecting images to print from all kinds of photographers, and they're able to make their overhead expenses by the volume of business they're generating by receiving images from lots of different people and photographers. I, as a studio owner, am only able to generate my overhead from the work that I can do, and I have a limited bandwidth. I have a limited capacity to produce enough work to cover that overhead, so I have to mark my expenses up significantly to cover the overhead of having a studio location. So we have to get comfortable with knowing which pricing model we're using and why we're using it. Typically, in the retail portrait pricing markup, we would charge a small portrait sitting fee with the idea of just covering our expenses for doing the photo shoot, those have gone away for the most part. I'm charging a sitting fee, but I'm charging it not at a small rate, but I'm charging it based upon my time put into the photo shoot because I know how much my time has to generate. So as photographers and cinematographers, we only make money two times. Once in the sales room and once when we're actually behind the camera producing the work. So our goal is to book as many photo shoots as we can, as many video projects as we can, because anytime I'm filming or shooting, I know I'm generating revenue, and I want to generate as many sales proposals as I can, because the only time I'm really making any money is when I'm selling my products and services to my clients. This retail pricing model is a very simple model in that all I have to do is look at my lab expenses and do the appropriate markup and come up with a final price. And here's an example of an 8x10 print a la carte. And many of you will do the first print at one price, the second print at a slightly discounted price. That's pretty standard. I want to revisit this idea of sitting fees and just caution you about something really important. With the advent of digital photography, the reality is that the people that don't want to pay for their services can easily steal from you with digital imagery. They can clone out a watermark. They can do a lot of different things. And I will tell you, don't chase after it. I knew one photographer that spent all his time in court and went out of business because he was chasing after bad customers. It's better to have a good working relationship with a client and educate them about copyright, educate them about the value of work, and know that copyright laws keep honest people honest, and it's not going to prevent dishonest people from stealing from you. So it's better to pre-qualify the right kind of client up front and build in enough of a profit margin that you're not wasting your time going into court chasing after every portrait client that wants to reproduce an extra 5x7 to give as a gift to somebody. I firmly believe that because I've watched photographers go out of business because they were spending such an amount of time litigating their copyright cases. They developed a bad relationship with their marketplace. You have to understand something really critical. In the customer's eyes, they're never wrong. The photographer's always wrong. So what happens is, and I agree with them, to be honest with you, because most photographers never talk about copyright to the client. They just say, here's the prints, and or they shoot and they burn digital files, and we've seen a movement towards photographers afraid to talk about contracts. So most clients don't understand copyright unless you educate them. The better clients, once you do educate them, they will come back to you and they will purchase their images from you lawfully at the prices you set. However, there's going to be a certain percentage of the marketplace that they can't afford to buy from you, but they want your services, and they will buy the minimum and then find ways to share the images discreetly that are technically in violation of your contract. So it's become very critical that we don't just depend on the markup model for our living. We have to charge a sitting fee that is at a high enough rate that if the client never comes back, I've still made my money. And in fact, I've had situations where the client doesn't come back to order prints, but they come back for more photo shoots, and I'm fine with it because I know I'm making the profit I need to off of my time. This is why we have 3 different pricing models. So my sitting fee is going to be based upon my creation fee of how much time I invest in that photo shoot. And then if they don't come back, I don't have any more work to do. I don't have any more expenses to do. I'm moving on to the next photo shoot. I'm not going to be concerned about the resale value of my work. One of the big issues out there is a lot of photographers who are afraid of sales want to put their images up online in online galleries thinking that the lab will take care of selling the prints for me. They'll just order off the website. And I will tell you that I watched a lot of photographers go out of business early on that adopted that strategy because they weren't charging enough for the photo shoot and their online sales didn't keep up with in-person sales. In fact, if you go into the business discussions at Professional Photographers of America, there is a real movement. There's a real movement back towards looking at in-person sales as the way to make a living and selling prints as a way to make a living, because digital products are so difficult to make a profit on. So these are things you'll have to consider. I know a lot of wedding photographers have gotten a lot smarter about their online sales, and that they bill for that service up front in their wedding package. And then if the client orders enough, then they actually deduct that fee. But they're actually charging for putting an online album out there, because they know very few people will actually purchase or get around to it. It's not that they don't intend to, even, it's they forget to. I will tell you a personal story about that, of being a customer of a photographer back in New York. I went back east for my best friend's wedding. I was a best man in the wedding. My friends paid $6,000 to a wedding photographer, and the only images I saw were put on an online gallery. Well, I never got around to ordering any of the prints off the online gallery, and wouldn't you know, 6 months later the images were gone and couldn't be retrieved. I never had a chance to get that photo. Whereas when I do weddings, I make sure to build in the cost of a 5x7 gift portrait for each member of the wedding party, to make sure people don't forget the images, don't forget the work that was done. And I consider that great advertising. I do that as a complimentary service, because basically for each 5x7 I'm handing out that's branded with my company name on it, that's a advertising piece for word-of-mouth referrals, which is how you grow your business. All right, enough on that about setting fees. I wanted you to be thinking about that. Let's move on. This screen I'm not going to spend a lot of time with, because it's really technical and I want you to read through it. And that just goes to show you the relationship between your profit and loss statement and your overall pricing strategy, and how important it is to control your expenses, to not have your cost of goods sold over 25%. And really what this is showing you is the formula that's built into the spreadsheet for you. That's the neat thing about this, is the formula is built into the spreadsheet automatically to calculate it for you. But I wanted to show you what that formula is. And essentially what that is you figure out what your total self-pay salary plus fixed expenses is for a year. In this scenario, we came up to a dollar amount of $115,900 of annual fixed expenses. And then we divide that, total by a factor of 1 minus our cost of goods sold percentage. So if we have a 25% cost of goods sold, we would divide our annual expenses by a factor of 0.75. And what that's saying is that for every dollar that I generate revenue, I'm only actually earning 75 cents, because 25 cents off the top is going to cost of goods sold. So if I had no cost of goods sold, I'd be dollar for dollar, $1 over $1 would be equal to $1. However, when I have a dollar divided by only 75 cents of each dollar coming in for revenue, well then I need to generate more revenue. I need to generate a factor of 1.25, or 25% more revenue, so I need $1.25. In this scenario, you can see that we've divided 115,950 by a factor of 0.75 and determine that we need actual gross sales of 154,533 in sales to break even. Again, I want to remind you, Starbucks generates over $800,000 just by selling coffee. So I think we can do that as photographers, and I know lots and lots of people that make a really good living in photography. The other factors I want to share with you is that once we know our total sales, now we can start to set price points and figure out how many sales in the year that we need, so that we can then do the math backwards and figure out how many people do we need to contact. And this is where I say in the modern era of business, our goal is to build a mailing list, ideally get 10,000 people on a mailing list. And if everybody just spent a little bit, we would have a tremendously successful business. But in reality, I'm going to look at my different products and services. I'm going to peg some price points, and I'm going to divide that into the total revenue necessary in order to determine how many sales of that particular product I need. We will talk a lot more about profit and loss statements and accounting at another module, where you'll get a complete breakdown of those particular factors. So far, we've looked at two pricing models, and the key is to have these prices set prior to accepting the assignments. Don't try to negotiate with the client afterwards. That's when you have miscommunications, and miscommunications always lead to an unhappy client. And an unhappy client will tell at least 20 other people about how bad you were in customer service and pricing. It takes so few people to ruin your business. A happy client will tell maybe 3 to 4 people that they feel confident that they can give that referral to. So you get a lot fewer referrals than you do complaints, but it's very important that we keep our customers happy by having our prices up front and avoiding any sort of miscommunication. A lot of you are going to be concerned about looking at your prices going, what if I'm more expensive than the competition? Particularly if you go on Craigslist or you look at a lot of other websites, even Thumbtack, you'll see these ridiculously low budgets for photography. And I just want to remind you that if you charge what you need to charge, don't worry about what anybody else is, because you're not competing on price. You're competing on quality and customer service. That's the boutique business model that we're after, and that's the franchise business model where we're creating a consistent process where people know what to expect up front and they know the value of it up front. So if you're worried about pricing, you're worried about the wrong thing, because you will never be able to compete on price, because there are too many photographers out there willing to give their work away for free. That's probably the biggest challenge we face, is photography and cinematography are career fields that if we could do it for free, we would. And so one of the issues that have come up in the modern era is this idea of the reputation economy, that photographers and filmmakers will do projects for free in exchange for exposure and notoriety for doing that project. YouTube is making a fortune off of crowdsource. This is crowdsourcing, essentially, of projects, and we see that with stock photography. We see that now with some commercial photography, and those photographers never last in the industry. The ones that make a good living are the ones that have a disciplined approach and build a business model that supports them, and they provide excellent customer service, excellent products, and they charge the prices that they have to. The question isn't what are you charging? The question is, what are you doing to be worth what you're charging? Also, it's important to understand which pricing model you need to use in order to make good choices. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. In scenario one, I once had a job where I was asked to photograph at a trade show. Happened to be a Dairy Farmers of Washington trade show event where they wanted some portraits taken. They immediately wanted 500 5x7 prints to be delivered at a morning breakfast at 9 a.m. So basically, I had 12 hours to shoot, edit, and deliver 500 5x7 prints. If I charged based upon the commercial rate of, at that time I was at $100 an hour, I would have charged $1,200 plus the cost of 500 5x7 prints, which would have been about $30 in paper to produce. It was not very expensive at that time to produce those prints. In fact, go to Costco now, and how much does a 4x6 cost? It's like 19 cents. So I would have been charging roughly $1,500 total, let's say. Well, since I was producing 500 prints, I actually negotiated a per print price of $5 a print, which still seemed tremendously less expensive than my a la carte price of $20 for a custom 5x7. I was able to do that because I was making 500 prints from a small number of images. So the result was I was able to charge the client $2,500 for 500 prints versus charging $1,500 for my time plus materials. So you want to bounce back and forth between these two models, and this is why you need to understand those two models. I'll give you another interesting scenario. I also once had a client hire me to photograph children's portraits at a preschool, and they told me the person that called me from the preschool had been a previous client of mine. I'd photographed weddings, high school senior portraits, really knew their family well. And so when she called and said, Ira, we'd like you to come photograph these children portraits, and oh, by the way, each child will only have a budget of $12 to spend with you, my stomach just kind of dropped, thinking there's no way I can make money at a $12 price point. The reality is, I said, thank you very much. Let me work on a proposal and I'll get back to you. And what I did is I figured out for $12, the maximum I could spend on goods and services was $3. So I called up my photo finishing lab and said, hey, I've got $3 to spend on children's portraits. I will photograph it like a team sport event where I will use one backdrop, one exposure, and we will just do it like Santa Claus photos. What can you give me? And they came back with, well, we can give you the equivalent of one 8x10 sheet of paper, so you can do what you want with it. 2 5x7s, one 5x7 4 wallets, or just one 8x10. So I put that price list together and put a proposal together, and I submitted it in hopes that they would go, oh, that's not enough, because I wasn't competing with the other team sports providers. But surprise, surprise, they came back and said, that sounds great. We'd like to book you. So then I had to face the prospects of being out of my studio for 2 days because I needed to photograph over 2 days for 2 different classes. And then I needed to be out of my studio for another day for reshoots in case there was any kids that didn't show up the first time, or in case I somehow ended up needing to rephotograph a child whose eyes were closed, etc. So the interesting thing is, because I kept my profit margin where it needed to be, I had a maximum of 25% cost of goods sold, I actually generated over $500 per day for about 3 hours worth of work. It was incredibly profitable for me. The only other thing I will tell you about that story is I did that photo shoot in September, and I started getting families coming to me wanting family portraits, and when I gave them my portrait prices for families, they balked at it because the price was so much higher than $12. And I had to explain to them the difference between doing an event photography versus doing a one-off a la carte creative project. That still didn't work out for me very well. I didn't gain any new clients from it. So then I had to realize something very important. In fact, I went and got on the phone with a photographer down in Portland who I knew was generating over $1 million a year doing this kind of photography. And I asked him, how do you manage the custom versus the event photography business model? And he told me something really critical. He put his name on his custom portraits, and he used a generic business name for all his event photography, and he actually hired other photographers to do the work. So he had 2 lines of business, 2 complete different brands, one for high-end custom work and one for the lower-end volume business, which is what this was at $12 a unit. At $12 price to my customers, that's a very low price. The only way I made money was because of the higher volume. So the idea is, don't mix your brands between high volume, low price, and custom, low volume, high price. You need to have separate brands for each of those types of activities. This leads us to the third pricing model, and it's the pricing model that I use more than any other pricing model in my business today, and that is a hybrid pricing. Going back to what I said about how it's really hard to charge for your time, but I can factor the cost of my time and build a package that looks very valuable to my client and is a really good exchange of products and services for the price I'm charging. So let's talk about the hybrid pricing model. It's very hard to charge a sitting fee if I need to charge $200 for a 1 hour photo shoot. It's just not gonna, people are gonna, what do I get for that? So typically what I'm gonna do is build a package. And here's an example of a wedding package where I know that the minimum amount of time it takes me to do a small wedding is 20 hours of my time, because I'm factoring the time for booking it, factoring the time for the pre-wedding consultation, the engagement session, which I really encourage you to do an engagement session before photographing a wedding if at all possible. It's nice to get to know people before you have to spend the day with them. And that I'd have to put in all those hours of post-production, working with the client to design an album. It's just a lot of work. And so if I factor my 20 hours at my hourly rate, and in this scenario we're talking about $155 hour rate, that comes to $3,100 just for my time. That's not going to be sellable to most clients. So I'm going to round that up by $400 to $3,500, which allows me to use that extra money to put products and services in. And so that gives me the money I need to add a 12-page leather album, 16 by 20 lab print from the lab, some 5x7 gift prints, etc. So when I actually finish putting that package together, this is where I talk about the description being so important. My final package would include a pre-wedding consultation, an engagement session, newspaper wedding announcement, social media wedding announcement gallery, where that's actually advertising for me, 4 hours of wedding day coverage, wedding album design consultation, 12-page custom design leather album with up to 48 images, based on a maximum of four images per page, although I'm never going to do that for the entire book because I want some large prints in there as well. 8 5x7 gift prints for the wedding party and the bride and groom, as well as a wall portrait, an heirloom 16x20 wall portrait for $3,500. Now, I will tell you that actually sounds really competitive in the marketplace, and I would be able to sell that pretty easily, particularly if you go to the Wedding Knot and look at typical sales prices. It's all about how you package and use this hybrid pricing model to calculate your creative fee based upon your time and your retail markup for the materials that you can put together at a reasonable price to build the overall value proposition to your client. So description becomes very, very important. If I just said wedding package $3,500, I'm not going to get anybody interested in it. It's about selling the product by how you package it and how you describe it. I'd like to take a moment here and just look at some price lists that I found online of different types of businesses. So here's an example from Yin Louie. They are a well-known, highly regarded portrait studio based up and down the West Coast, and I've talked about them earlier. And so they have package prices as well as their a la carte prices listed here. And you can see they have different price lists for different kinds of services listed as well. More local is here's a corporate photography business that is just giving a price quote from $250 up to over $10,000, and the types of services. The kind of services this company is offering is branding photography. So they go in and do stories about businesses and help them produce online content. This is another term that you should pay attention to in commercial photography, is content marketing. Here is a online price list for high school senior portraits by Crystal Matson. I just got to tell you, I think she's doing a phenomenal job with building her business model. In fact, what I love about Crystal Matson's website is you can look at a video where she clearly tells the story about why her products and services are worth what she charges. And I'm not going to play that right now, but definitely worth checking out. And we will be revisiting this in our portfolio class. So there's a couple of different portrait pricing strategies. And you'll notice when we get to digital media production that involves video production, you rarely see pricing listed on any website. You're going to see more of a demo reel of video projects, and the reason you're not going to see pricing is because it is really hard to develop a set price when everything you're doing is a custom production. So we're going to talk about that. Here is a website for a video production company that does give a more in-depth discussion where they talk about they charge by their day rate of $1,200 a day or half-day rate of $800. You'll notice the half-day rate is 2/3 of a full-day rate, and I'm guessing the reason for that is because it takes just as much work to pack up and load gear and unpack gear for a full-day shoot as it does for a half-day shoot, so they're factoring that factor. They're also talking about how a typical video costs about $1,000 a minute, but that they've had 3-minute videos that cost from $4,000 up to $10,000. And they're describing why there's such a variety of prices because of the concept, the pre-production, the video shoot, the post-production. I want to point out though that they do offer the entry point price point of $1,000 for a small video story. And this is a great idea because what they're doing is they're developing a recipe. They're going to say, I'm going to ask these questions, I'm going to show these shots, and you're going to get a fixed 1-minute video that's about your your business. And so they've actually developed a package that is at a entry point price point that's very acceptable. And that's where we'll talk about price points a little bit more. This is an example of how important it is to be sensitive to market price points and to develop packages that you can deliver at that price point. So even though they have all these custom services, they do have that formulaic package approach to video storytelling as well. So spend some time looking at the marketplace and seeing what the prices look like in the market that you're interested in. If you want to sell stock photography, you're going to have to look at individual stock photo sites. I will tell you, having purchased some stock photography recently on behalf of some clients, that Adobe, for example, is selling monthly subscriptions. You will find a lot of imagery that is not based upon the individual images, but a certain number of images per month. And so you'll want to look at the various stock agencies. So this is Shutterstock. Let's just take a look at some photos to get some ideas of pricing. Let's say we're looking at architecture. And see, they want to sell you a subscription to this image. And you have to have a contract, or you have to have a sign-in account to even access and download that image. The same is true for Adobe Stock. So Adobe, they actually charge $30 a month to access that. And then there's another website. iStock Photography, if we go in there and look for different types. Let's say I want to be a travel photographer. Let's see how much this image would cost me. That looks like a Steve McCurry image. They would charge $33 for that image, and I'm guessing the photographer would get maybe 50% of that. I'd have to look at the contract with Getty Images to see what photographers actually get. So if you want to do travel and stock photography, you're going to want to research and kind of figure out what the price points are for various images. I will tell you this, with stock photography, the goal is to build up your library. In fact, I've put in an article in our module that talks about that. There's an article in Scientific American about a stock photographer that talks about how he generates his revenue from having enough images in circulation so that he's selling a lot of images every year. So that's something to look at. And then the other thing is to look, if you want to be selling your photos to editorial publications. And here's a link to a spreadsheet. I think this is actually a WikiLeaks document that basically people anonymously submit how much they got paid from various editorial magazines, newspapers. So here's one: American Motorcyclist will pay a $500 half-day rate for assignment work. Here's another agency that pays $200 a day. So you can see what day rates are in the editorial market. The big thing there is you're probably not going to get high income assignments, but you might get some travel expenses covered, and it's more of a lifestyle commitment for that sort of photography. Maybe I wanted to be an outdoor sports photographer. I want to photograph snowboarders and skiers and sell those to magazines. Well, I'd want to spend some time looking at what magazines are actually paying for cover rates, for inside pages, and store and overall photo story prices. Generally with editorial photography, you're not setting the price, the magazine publisher is. You have to decide if they're offering you enough money to do the kind of work that you want to do at the quality level you want to do it. So that's a little bit more difficult. I will tell you that when you're really ready to get into editorial and commercial advertising photography, I'm going to recommend that you really spend some time with Agency Access. It's a tremendous resource for getting mailing lists, to get client names, etc. Also, if you want to build a career as a travel and adventure photographer, then you're going to need to really focus your attention on editorial publications, magazines, books, as well as stock photography agencies. And I'm going to encourage you to really invest in also developing video clips, stock video footage as well, and video storytelling. Actually, video clips are the highest growing segment of the stock image market out there, so you want to spend some time. A longtime publisher is the Photographer's Market that you can get by year. The 2018 just came out, and what's interesting about this publication is it actually lists the names of publications and what they pay based upon the size of publication. You don't get paid up front, you get paid upon publication. So I might do a job in the winter that I won't get paid for until summertime when it actually publishes. So these are things that we need to know going into it. Here is another database for photographers who want to work with art directors and magazine editors to find out what they pay and what kinds of imagery they're looking for. The disadvantage of this particular website, in my experience, is that it's really designed to not just dump a lot of information in your lap, but rather you have to go search and retrieve and look for it, and you have to manually copy the data down in your own spreadsheet. They're not going to let you download large batches of information. I think it's probably that case because the people that allow their information to be published don't want to be bombarded with emails that are just spam because they are bulk delivered. So, but it's a great resource for taking a look at figuring out what people are willing to pay for your services as an editorial photographer. Again, I go back to Agency Access because within that, they actually have a lot of information in a database format that feeds into their marketing email campaign management software. I can actually buy email marketing campaigns from Agency Access that they're responsible to deliver to the people that have agreed to be in their database. So that works out really well. I got turned on to this by a really successful commercial photographer who was busy all the time, traveling all over the world, said, well, this is how I market. I go through Agency Access, I get the names, I send my portfolio, I send my marketing pieces, and I get work. So take a look at it, and I hope this helps you develop more knowledge. Put this in your notebook under the research component, and put this under the research you have for pricing for your particular industry. I'd like to finish this video by giving you a few practical business tips that are based upon years of experience. Number one, I like to use the metaphor of sailing to describe my career. It's not going to be a straight line from zero to success. You're going to tack one direction and then you're going to change direction, go another direction. So even though I'm asking you to build a business model based on a genre of photography and build some products based upon that genre of photography, the reality is you might get into it and change your mind and want to do something else. That's completely okay. In my case, I spent 5 years doing commercial advertising photography for manufacturers and industrial plants. It was all location-based photography. And then 5 years in, I developed a retail portrait studio and decided that's really where my love was. Now my business is changing to where it's split between fine art and portraiture. The skills that we're teaching in this class are applicable in whatever direction you go to, and it's important for you to keep in mind the difference between the skills of building a business model and a career model and actually the implementation of those skills. So we're asking you to apply it towards a particular scenario that you're interested in exploring for the next few years. You're going to change, and don't worry about it. Your career will continue to progress just the way a sailboat progresses in a yacht race. They tack one direction with the wind, and they go with the wind for a while, and then tack another direction. Sometimes they have to even go against the wind and just go a little bit slower. It's a great metaphor for describing what our career is like. And my next tip is just keep moving. Don't slow down and get scared. Running a business can feel like you're juggling so many things in the air at the same time, and understand that this is a lifestyle, not just a job, and that you just don't let mistakes and disappointments keep you from making progress. Don't let perfection get in the way of progress. You just keep getting things done, and you'll be amazed when you take time to look back. You'll be amazed at what you accomplish. Just a reminder, Really emphasize the value of a luxury brand in your products and services. Luxury brands thrive during a recession. When people are tightening their budget, they're looking for real value. Give it to them. Give it to them in the form of not only the quality of your imagery and your video work, give it to them in the quality of your packaging, your customer service. Build the business processes from your customer's viewpoint. What's going to help them the most? This one's so critical. Solve problems for your clients, don't create them. And what I mean by that is don't sell products and services that are incomplete. Don't think you're going to have a do-it-yourselfer and I'm just going to give you the bare minimum. What this means is I want to give my clients finished work that they can either just go hang on the wall, they can post to their website, they can do whatever it is they need to use that imagery for. And I'm not going to give them raw ingredients, if that makes any sense. I'm not going to give them images that need retouching. I'm not going to give them images that need custom framing. That either I'm going to give them something, go get a ready-made frame, or I'm going to sell them the frame with my package. Do something hard. That is so important. There is no room for mediocre photography. There was a time when you could get away with that because the cost of buying into the business was so high. The cameras, the chemicals, the computers, all that stuff was so expensive. The reality is people have cell phones that do great quality of work. So guess what? All that boring stuff in the middle is gone. And one photographer tells me that he actually likes this business environment we're in better because he's never bored. He only does high-end, high-quality work that he feels really excited about doing. He's not doing the mediocre stuff that the people can do themselves. This is a really important one, particularly when it comes to pricing your work, and that is to recognize that you are not your customer. Yes, we want to find clients that have shared values and shared personality traits, but the reality is when it comes to the financial aspect of your business, charge what you're worth and let your customer decide whether they can afford it. It's a mistake to think your clients can't afford you. The reality is I watch every day people that allegedly are low income will afford whatever is so valuable to them. And I'll share a personal story. In my business, I've dedicated at least 10% of my work to what I call pro bono work. And years ago, I had a sales campaign, a TV advertisement that was joint marketed with Subway sandwich shops that I was giving away 2 high school senior portrait packages that were at that time a $600 value. I got TV spots that I couldn't afford to buy on my own that Subway subsidized. Subway got customers coming into the door because they wanted to enter the giveaway contest. So it was a win-win partnership that was very strategic for me. I got exposure on TV and radio. Subway got customers coming in and buying sandwiches. Well, I gave away the 2 packages right away, and that was no problem. But I took all the entries and I had my employee call every one of them and offer them a free portrait session and an 8x10 gift print. Well, 2 things were really interesting about that because there's always 2 things. Number one, it turns out the majority of the people that entered the contest actually didn't even have a high school senior, and they were asking if they could get a family portrait taken instead because they hadn't had a family portrait in many years. I was totally thrilled with that because I never had a family portrait order that was less than $1,000, and this was 20 years ago. The more people, this is a little business tip too, the more people in the photo, the more value the photo has because there's more people that will buy it. So family photos have more people, particularly extended family, make more money. So to make a long story a little bit shorter, I agreed to do all these family portraits. Well, I would take turns making these calls myself, and I made one call in particular, and I had a person on the phone saying, you know, I just need to tell you, we will not be able to afford to buy anything from you. So you don't have to do this family portrait for us, Ira. We understand that you're here to make money. We don't have it. We can't afford it. And I said, you know what, no worries, please come in, please let me have the privilege of making this family portrait for you. I would love to do it, and I dedicate at least 10% of my work to pro bono giveaway work, and so I'm happy for you to come in and take advantage of this free offer. It's totally free, you don't have to buy anything. This family came in, and I get choked up just thinking about it because they came in wearing their Sunday best clothing, and their Sunday best clothing was tattered and torn. And in fact, I ended up doing retouching to mend the clothing in the final portrait. But they were a family filled with love. Their children were happy, they were happy, and it was just a huge honor. I was so moved by this family that instead of giving them an 8x10 print, I actually had the lab make a 16x20 canvas portrait, and I put it in a frame, and I personally delivered it to their home. When I went to their home, it was what you would expect for poverty. There were tons of toys out in the yard, but everything was dilapidated. Cars were old. There was chickens in the yard. It was like going into a stereotypical John Steinbeck Grapes of Wrath sort of scenario. It kind of reminded me of Migrant Mother. I was so happy to deliver that portrait, and they were such a neat family. I thanked them. They thanked me. We went our separate ways. Amazingly, 6 months later, I received a check for several $100s as a thank you for that family portrait, that they somehow found a way and they insisted on paying for that portrait. You don't establish the value of your work completely by yourself. Your clients establish the value with you. And when people value, they will find a way to pay for it. So you are not your customer, at least in terms of finances. So don't be afraid to set your prices. And I will add this, when you're negotiating, don't let silence be a bad thing. Lay out what your price proposal is and stop, shut up, and listen. And let the client express any questions or concerns they have about price, and then you can negotiate. You can negotiate a payment plan. You can negotiate a layaway plan. You have options there, and then you can both come to some agreement that makes you both really excited to do the work together, because every project that you do with a client is a joint effort. You're going to hear this a lot. Develop a niche market. The narrower the niche, the deeper the profits. And so you want to define your target market based upon your mission. That mission really tells you what your niche market is. Get known for one thing that you do better than anybody else in a unique brand, unique style, something that really reflects who you are. The internet has proven that there is an unlimited demand for niche products. Don't worry about developing too narrow a niche, because when you're known for one thing, people will ask you for the other products and services that they need, assuming that if you do one thing well, you do everything well. It may not be true, and that's why it's important to have people that you can refer them to, and a willingness to say no to the kinds of work you shouldn't take on. But having a narrow niche will really generate deeper profits. We will get into this when we do our portfolio development course, but really we want to also start developing what we call proof points in business. And this is ways we prove the value of our work before the client sees what we do. We do that with portfolios, we do that with customer testimonials, we do it with a LinkedIn profile endorsements, we do it with reviews, and we do it with building prototypes and working with prospective clients to show them what we do. So that's what we'd call a spec job, where we do work on speculation that if you like it, you'll then pay for it. I don't recommend that, by the way. The things I focus on are portfolio, customer testimonies, LinkedIn profiles, and any sort of review that I can get through a public relations, any sort of review I can get through publicity. The last thing relates to what I just said, which is don't worry about being put into a box. What we want to do is we want to build our own custom box that fits our brand and fits our personality. The last thing is we need to develop an audience. So we want to share our work on Instagram, social media, blogging. We want to get it out in the community. And the most important thing we want to get back from all those efforts is we want to get a mailing list. So we're going to talk about that in portfolio class. How do I develop something to give away in exchange for getting that email address that allows me to contact and show what I do on a regular basis to my target market? Finally, the last business tip I have for you is to develop a workflow plan for each of your products and services. And here is just a graphic to describe a dashboard, if you will, of how many inquiries, how many brochures are sent, how many proposals are sent, how many deposits have been paid, etc. You want to start thinking about dashboards, and what I'm going to do is share with you a short video advertisement that discusses the age of the customer. Take a look at it, and then I will look forward to seeing you in our next module.
The revolutions came in waves. Water and steam mechanized production, electricity created mass production, and electronics and IT automated everything. It brought us the mainframe, the client server, the cloud. And now the next wave is building, a blurring of the physical and digital world. A fourth industrial revolution is here. But the most profound change is not happening in technology itself. It's happening to the customer. The great equalizers, technology, mobility, and the internet have made customers exponentially smarter, faster, and put them in control like no other time in history. Welcome to the age of the customer. These customers are not looking for a product. They're looking for a trusted advisor and an experience. They don't want features and gimmicks. They want a platform they can build and shape with you into the future. They're not just looking for answers. They want deep, meaningful insights. And the latest generation doesn't even want to talk to you until they meet your community. But how do you pivot your entire ecosystem and innovate to create this modern-day customer experience? Introducing Salesforce Lightning, the fastest, most complete approach to put your customers at the center of everything you do now and in the future. Create a new kind of customer success with Sales Cloud Lightning. There's no longer a linear process for sales. It's knowing where the customer is at all times and being there for them whenever they're ready to engage. The Lightning experience allows your team to sell faster with powerful analytics to make you smarter, and fully optimized for mobile so you can run your business from absolutely anywhere. Because Lightning is a rich platform with a design system and components that let you build any app you need to succeed for any device as fast as your customers demand. But selling is just the beginning of the new customer experience. Nothing is more important in this new era than customer service, and there's no better way to help make your customers love you than with Service Cloud Lightning. The Lightning console empowers your agents with speed. With Service for Apps, you can now embed instant help right at the exact moment customers need and want it most. Analytics, knowledge, and 360-degree views all shareable across every single rep and employee in your company, so no single customer ever falls through the cracks. And with Field Service Lightning, every rep on any device will be more productive than ever. Salesforce Lightning lets you do everything faster, better, smarter. And the new Lightning Trailhead experience will educate your entire team in no time, so you can amplify your story like never before. Give your employees the tools to be smarter and more predictive about everything. Build a powerful community of evangelists with the Lightning Community Builder. Create deeper, more meaningful marketing with personalized one-to-one experiences for every single customer. And not only tap into the Internet of Things, but have the power to see and thrill the customer that's behind each and every single connection. The forces of disruption and innovation are shaping the future of every industry. To win, you need to connect to your customers in a whole new way. For the past 17 years, our focus as a company has been on one simple thing: the customer. The age of the customer has arrived, and everything you need to succeed is here.
So there you have it, which is kind of an overview of how customer service, pricing, and developing a relationship with your clients is so critical. I guess that gets to the last business tip, which is ultimately your business is not about you, it's about your customer. Now we're going to talk about, this is a advertisement for a major customer relationship management tool that a lot of larger businesses use, although I will tell you that I know photographers that use this particular product. But in another module, we're actually going to review all the tools that are now available to you that make running and managing your business so much more easy and effective, and you can run a business from anywhere in the world. And so I'm really excited about that. That's going to be in an upcoming module where we're going to pick the tools for applying all of our business model in a very, very streamlined, effective way. So with that, I want you to work on your pricing strategies and develop some mock-ups of some potential products and services that and develop the pricing for it so that you have an idea of what that skill set is about and how important it is at this juncture of time. Thank you so much. I'm really so excited for you. I'm so glad you're here and a part of this class. Please message me with any questions you have. Thanks again. We'll see you soon.